UFC Fight Night Vegas 79, Fiziev versus Gamrot takes place this weekend, and I'm going to go through the entire card, starting with the early prelims, ending with the main event, giving my prediction and breakdown for every single fight on the card, starting with the early prelim opener of Montserrat Rendon versus Tamires Vidal. Now, I know this isn't the most professional way to break down a fight, but all I'm going to say is a few things about this matchup. I'm going with Tamires Vidal. Look at Tamires Vidal and look at Montserrat Rendon. Who's going to be fighting with a little bit more aggression and anger at life? I'm going to say that Tamires Vidal is going to absolutely destroy Montserrat Rendon with a TKO in this fight. I think it's safe to bet by TKO. Montserrat Rendon is 34 years of age and started her amateur MMA career at 30 years of age. She's 5-0. 2-0 as an amateur. Not a bad record, to be fair, but she's had 2 split decisions on the regional scene. Had a split decision in her last fight. Didn't even have to go through the contender series. She beat a 4-4 girl by split decision, so therefore she's now in the UFC. It's never going to get better on that side of the sport if this is what we're signing to the sport. But whatever, I guess they're just giving her a chance. Maybe she pulls it off. But just look at Tamires Vidal and imagine the voice that comes out of that. I'm going to have to go with Tamires Vidal getting herself a TKO. She's only lost to Carol Rosa on the regional scene. I like that she even took on Carol Rosa, who was 9-3 at the time, in her second fight ever in her career anyway. That shows confidence from her team and gym. And she's 2-0 in the UFC so far and got into the UFC off of a 5-0 opponent, Ailin Perez. Even though it was a legal knee, she was doing good in that fight. So I'm going to have to go with Tamires Vidal getting this one done. She's got knockout power. She'll get it done. We move on. Mizuki Inoue versus Hannah Goldy. I'm going to go with Mizuki Inoue. Hannah Goldy, I think, is one of these women's MMA fighters that sort of got into the sport to promote her, certain page that a lot of these fighters have, that people pay subscription fees to. I think she got into the sport for the spotlight, so she could transfer over to that. She's only beaten Emily Whitmire, who was 4-4, by armbar. She lost to Molly McCann in the first round, easily. And I think we've realised now that Molly McCann's nothing that special. So the fact that you were seen as a can to her means that you are a can of cans. You know what I'm saying? That's how that works, in my opinion. Lost to Deanna Belbita, Miranda Granger. Nothing too bad there, but they're not great, are they, those 2 opponents? So, either way, she had a decent run outside the UFC. Now she doesn't really have anything good going for her. Coming off a TKO loss a year and 2 months ago. Mizuki Inoue is still 29 years of age, by the way. She's still 29 years of age. Hannah Goldy's 31. Mizuki Inoue is 29 years of age, has a lot of experience, 14-6. I reckon she'll get this one done. She is coming off loss to Amanda Lemos by decision ages ago, 3 years ago, but she's very young. So that 3 years tells me, okay, she's taken her time. Maybe she had some injuries, but she's wanting to come back when she's ready to go on a run. She beat Yanan Wu, beat Vivian Pereira, who was 13-2 in Invicta, lost a split decision in Invicta to Verna Jandaroba, and losing to Lemos by decision and not getting knocked out by her, I think is very, very impressive. So I'm going to have to go with Mizuki Inoue in this fight 100%. We move on. Up the card to another fight, Jake Collier versus Mohammed Usman. I'm going to go Mo Usman. There was a part of me that wanted to say, you know what, Jake Collier might rock him. But Tuffa's pretty good, and Usman did survive him and still was able to work his wrestling on him. I know that Tuffa doesn't have the best of wrestling. Junior Tuffa, this is, not Justin Tuffa. But at the same time, Jake Collier, this card really does... it's such a bad sport sometimes, man. Jake Collier is a morbidly obese middleweight that just doesn't care anymore, and it's just sad. Usman is like an athletic, juiced up monster at heavyweight that is a heavyweight. He probably could make light heavyweight. He's only 240, so I think he could trim down a bit and he's probably a natural light heavyweight, you know what I'm saying? But he's got long arms, he's got knockout power, he's got commitment to the game. He wants to make a run. He's sick of being in his brother's shadow, I assume. He's on a bit of a tear. You know what I mean? Not impressive fights by technique or entertainment value, but he's winning fights. You know, he's on a 2-fight win streak. He won the Ultimate Fighter, so you know what I mean? Like, he's trying to make something for himself. I think Jake Collier is just some fat, lazy middleweight that don't want to do the weight cut anymore and just wants these heavyweight paychecks because he's got decent hands. I don't think that's going to be enough to beat Mo Usman. I think he can wrestle with Collier a bit, and I think he can make it boring enough on the feet to where Collier's not really going to be able to expose his boxing. So maybe Collier could catch him. Not a bad underdog, but I'm going to have to go with Mo Usman, implementing his wrestling and his tit-for-tat style with power and range on the feet. We move on. Up the card, Jacob Malkoun versus Cody Brundage. I want to have some fun picks in this one, guys, but I feel like they're all a bit obvious. I'm going to have to go with Jacob Malkoun over Cody Brundage. Cody Brundage looked awful against Cedric Dumas. It's the only way of saying it. He looked absolutely awful against Cedric Dumas. He looked like he went for one takedown, didn't get it, and then absolutely shelled up and accepted defeat in that fight. He's now 8-5. He's lost to Mikhail Alekseychuk. He's lost to Cedric Dumas, which is not a good loss to have. Rodolfo Vieira, not bad. Not a bad one, you know what I'm saying? It's Rodolfo Vieira. He's pretty good. Pretty inactive right now as well. Wonder what's happened to him. But now you're on a 3-fight losing streak, and you're taking a fight with Jacob Malkoun. I know maybe this is like the UFC saying to you, basically, we're not going to give you a fight unless you take this one because you're nothing to us and we could cut you anyway. Maybe that's what this is. I know that, what's his name? Malkoun was supposed to fight, I can't even pronounce his name. I'm going to have to go on his... He was supposed to fight Aliskrav Kizrayev, but there's another guy that tried to fill in on short notice and I just can't remember his name. There it is. Robert Bereshek, who's like a dangerous regional fighter. Don't know what happened to him as to why he pulled out of this fight, but he was on a wicked streak outside the UFC. By the looks of him, maybe it was PED related, all I'm going to say. So that was actually an interesting matchup for Jacob Malkoun, but this is Cody Brundage. So he's filled in to save his career, basically, because they're giving him one more chance, and now Jacob Malkoun's going to outgrind him over 3 rounds because Brundage doesn't really have finishing potential unless it's against Tresean Gore, who's 4-3. Is Tresean Gore 4-3? What is Tresean Gore's record even? What is going on in the UFC? I feel like the talent level is so much... He's 4-2. My bad. Jesus. We move on. Up the card to another fight, which is Tim Means versus Andre Fialho. I'm going to go with Andre Fialho really reluctantly. Just because I think you need a little bit of athleticism to beat Andre Fialho at this point in his career. And I think Tim Means, his body is starting to reach that state of, we are rapidly losing testosterone here. That's the vibe that Tim Means' body is giving right now. He's got that Bryan Barberena transformation occurring to him right now, where it's just like, there ain't an ounce of testosterone in this body. We're losing muscle definition. We're literally melting away. There ain't a muscle insertion in sight. We're getting to that point with him. He lost to Alex Morono. Lost to Max... It was a split decision against Max Griffin. Cameron Van Camp is really bad. You know what? I'm trying to deny my thoughts, which is why I went on a rant about the testosterone level of Tim Means. I've got a sneaky feeling he catches Fialho and puts him away. So I'm going to go with Tim Means putting away Andre Fialho by KO. Am I? I've got a really weird feeling about it and I'm trying to deny it. Like, no, of course he doesn't. But whenever I have these hunches, dude, Fialho just keeps getting chinned. He just keeps getting chinned. But he is fighting Muslim Salikov and Joaquin Buckley and Jake Man. Oh, if I don't go for this, I'll be so upset. But you know what? I can't go Tim Means. I just... Let me just cope a little bit about what we're thinking of here. Oh, God, I hate when this happens, dude. I was actually, like, thinking, like, will I go Tim Means? You know what? No, I'm going with Fialho. But now I'm here at the crossroads. I'm actually starting to worry a little bit on what I should really pick. God, he's got the reach on Fialho. I think he's got a better chin, but he just don't have the same pop in his shots. The fight with Griffin was really close. And the Morono fight, Tim Means was doing pretty good. I'm going to go Tim Means. I'm going Tim Means getting a TKO over Andre Fialho. He was winning against Morono. I knew this would happen, dude. I told myself not to pick him, but here I am, and I've fucking done it because I can't get out of my head. I can just see Means beating him. I don't know what it is. The boxing of Means on Fialho, the way Fialho dips out the way and throws these like knockoff Pereira-style left hook counters. Means does really good 1-2s down the pipe. So I see an Adesanya versus Pereira-esque KO. And it's going to be Tim Means doing it to Fialho. TKO round 1. Fialho starts getting him up against the cage. And then Means goes bap, bap, 1-2 down the pipe and knocks him out. Going with Tim Means. We move on. Up the card, Miles Johns versus Dan Argueta. Dan Argueta. They've done this wrong in Tapology. I'm probably going to go with Argueta here. I've actually been quite surprised by Argueta's career because I didn't think he was going to be much of anything before he joined the UFC. I don't mind Miles Johns here, but I just can't help the fact that saying that Miles Johns had some of the weakest schedules of any fighter in the UFC. I mean, he did fight Mario Batista, but Mario Batista arguably just lost to Damon Blackshear, so got KO'd by him in round 2. But he beat Vince Morales by decision. Competitive. Anderson Dos Santos. Kevin Natividad. These are all schmucks. Kevin Natividad was one of the biggest can crushers to enter the sport in 2022. In 2020, sorry. One of the biggest can crushers we've ever had. Look at his record. I don't trust him. Lost to John Castaneda. Got wore out as the fight went on. One thing that I see from Dan Argueta, really well trained, at a great gym. Jackson Wink MMA. Really tough. Got a grappling background. He does judo. Has a judo background, sorry. He's got really good hips. Really strong. Took Damon Jackson to a tough decision that I didn't think he was going to do. And he's not really the style to beat a Damon Jackson because you don't have much KO power or great striking. But he's a gradually improving fighter. Of course, we had the situation against Ronnie Lawrence, which was just a weird one, wasn't it? But he was doing good. You know what I mean? I'm going to have to go with Dan Argueta. I'm going to have to go Dan Argueta over Miles Johns. Really like him in this matchup. I think he beat great opponents on the regional scene. He beat Myron Santos, who was 12-0. Then he beat a 14-6 Diego Silva before coming into the UFC and getting Damon Jackson in his debut. I know he roasted Damon Jackson, but at the same time, it's a tough debut to have. He's a big dude for the division. And Argueta just sort of was surviving, having his back taken, being casual about it, reversing position now and again. So I'm going to have to go with Dan Argueta. I think with time, he can be a little bit of something. And I think Miles Johns has had his time to be something. And it turns out he wasn't. We move on. Up the card, Charles Jourdain versus Ricardo Ramos. Ramos. God, I'm tired. I'm going with Charles Jourdain over Ricardo Ramos. Now, I don't really think all that of Charles Jourdain. I think he's a little bit too fun to be good. You know, there's certain styles that are like that where you're like, this guy is actually really good, but he's just too fun. You know what I mean? The good guys ain't throwing the stuff that he's doing. They ain't screaming with Sparta kicks and stuff. It's just having a great style to watch is rarely the best base for MMA unless you're Yuri Prohaska, in which case you have to be some different level of savage. But I think Jourdain's good. Just came off an easy win against Kron Gracie. Has a good training camp for this one. Don't think there's going to be any problem with him on the ground against Ricardo Ramos after all that jiu-jitsu he must have been doing against Kron Gracie for the fight with Kron Gracie. Should have beaten Shane Burgos, which isn't a great win, seeing as Burgos is getting smoked at PFL these days. Nathaniel Wood, very close fight. Nathaniel Wood's very technically savvy. Ramos is wild. This is the thing about Ricardo Ramos. He's not a huge guy for featherweight. I think he has trouble making featherweight, if I'm not mistaken. Has trouble making featherweight at times. And I just feel like he fades in fights. He has a good potential to finish a fight early. But Charles Jourdain is just not a guy who gets finished. You know what I mean? He's got finished by Julian Erosa by being broken in the later rounds after going for finishes early on himself and fighting at a crazy pace. But other than that, split to Andre Fili, lost to Desmond Green, who out-grappled him at lightweight in his debut. He took a fight up a weight class. Lost to TJ Laramie on the regional scene by being out-wrestled. Doesn't really lose. Hasn't been finished outside of Erosa catching him in a dash choke. I don't see Ramos breaking him in the later rounds, and I don't see him getting a finish in the first against Jourdain. So I'm going to go Charles Jourdain, a little bit crisper with his striking, a little bit better technique, and I just saw something in the fight with not just Said Nurmagomedov. Oh no, so he was moving up from bantamweight. I take it back. Not just from Said Nurmagomedov, but the Lerone Murphy fight. don't be getting KO'd by those ground and pound shots. That was worrying to see, in my opinion. A little bit worrying to see. Took Journey Newson to a decision. I don't like all these signs. Did beat Bilalja, so this is the dumb sport that we're in. But Charles Jourdain should win this one. I think he's a lot more technical on the feet, a lot less wild, and I think he's going to catch Ramos swinging crazy and put him away in round 2 is what I'm going to go with here. We move on. Up the card, Bryan Battle versus AJ Fletcher. You know what? I think this is actually a winnable fight for AJ Fletcher, but I've got to go Bryan Battle here. I think he's a better fighter. I think Bryan Battle is a better fighter than AJ Fletcher. What are the odds on Means versus Fialho real quick? Let me just have a little gander at these. Because if he ain't even an underdog, like I'm expecting him to be. Okay, he's a good underdog. Right, cool, never mind. I feel better about it. I don't know why. I've got a vibe that Means going to catch him. Either way, Bryan Battle, AJ Fletcher. I like Bryan Battle here, man. I like Bryan Battle. I think you lost to Renat for Kretinov. I saw it coming. The odds were crazy close in the build-up. I was like, why are these odds close? Bryan Battle's going to get smoked by this dude. And it happened. He got out-wrestled. AJ Fletcher gets a bit carried away in the war. And Battle has a 10-inch reach advantage over him. AJ Fletcher got arms like a T-Rex. You know what I mean? Like, it's really strange. 10-2. Good record. Beat Themba Gorimbo in his last fight. Showed off a bit of grappling. I don't think he has the level of grappling like Renat Kretinov, who, by the way, dropped Battle badly first of all in that fight, to implement a heavy wrestling style on Bryan Battle. I think Battle will be okay to stuff some of these takedowns. It's not like Fletcher's dominating on the ground in these fights. He lost a grappling match to Matthew Semmelsberger, who's not even a wrestler, you know what I mean? The Angelusa fight, he had a moment where he hurt Angelusa, but that seems to happen, and that's normally why Angelusa loses, but Ange was still able to push back and win that fight and get control in the third in north-south position for quite some time. So I'm going to have to go with Bryan Battle over AJ Fletcher. The 10-inch reach advantage just makes me worry for AJ Fletcher's chin if they ever get scrappy. And normally Fletcher does get scrappy. He does get wild. He starts looking for a finish. He starts trying to make something happen if he is being outpointed. I can see that happening, and Battle doing what he did in his last fight, and that is to fire back in the pocket at a better range and do a bit of a Pavlovich Derek Lewis, where there's that little bit of a reach difference where one guy's sitting out the way of hooks and landing his own on the outside. So I'm going to go Bryan Battle by TKO, late round 2. We move on. Up the card, Marina Rodriguez versus Michelle Waterson-Gomez. Yeah, I've got to go Marina Rodriguez here. You know what? I don't like these fight nights recently, man. What happened to the fight nights where every fight on the card, you were kind of like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of these, don't get me wrong, the main event is one of them fights, but I feel like a lot of these are a bit weird, isn't there? Marina Rodriguez, Michelle Waterson-Gomez. I mean, I get giving Michelle Waterson a chance up the rankings. She's got good bunda, you know what I'm saying? But lost to Luana. She's on a 3-fight losing streak, including a loss to, guess who? Marina Rodriguez. Oh, I know you've lost twice since you lost to Marina Rodriguez, Michelle Waterson, but it's time for the rematch. What are we doing, man? What are we doing? Marina Rodriguez is going to win. She lost to Amanda Lemos by early stoppage. It was an early stoppage, 100%. That was the equivalent of stopping Adesanya Strickland if Strickland just had that flurry against the cage and didn't even drop him. You know what I mean? She literally got hurt, covered up for a split second against the cage, and then got the fight called off. Adesanya got dropped, beaten up on the ground, then beaten up against the cage, and they didn't stop it. I know stoppages in women's MMA are different because the referees just pity them, I think, a lot of the time. Pity them. But it was an early stoppage. It was silly. The Jandaroba fight is tough. Grappling, that type of stuff. You know, I mean, she got her Raul Rosas Jr. on. I'm going to have to go with Marina Rodriguez. I do think the Yan Xiaonan fight arguably could have gone to Yan Xiaonan. But she showed great grappling against Mackenzie Dern, jiu-jitsu awareness to escape certain positions, striking to take her out as well. And Mackenzie Dern has shown that she's a pretty good fighter as well. Beating Amanda Ribas, split decision with Carla Esparza. I reckon on a good night, Marina Rodriguez clearly does beat Michelle Waterson. And what do you know, she has beaten Michelle Waterson on a good night. So that's the end of that. She's already done this, and Waterson has only lost twice since then. I did think she could have beaten Luana Pinheiro, but it's just not a good look. So I'm going to have to go with Marina Rodriguez over Michelle Waterson. She clearly won the last fight between them over 5 rounds. Clearly won it, only lost round 4 because Waterson got a takedown in round 4 for one moment. Other than that, she got completely outstruck the entire fight over 5 rounds. 4-1. Marina Rodriguez. Gonna have to go with her. We move on. Gets it done 30-27. Bryce Mitchell versus Dan Ige. This is a good matchup, and I'm gonna go with Bryce Mitchell. You want to know why? Dan Ige, if you're a pressuring striker on the feet, you're gonna have trouble with him. You got to have really dangerous stand-up or really strong grappling. Now, Mitchell don't have the best of stand-up, and he'll even admit that himself. It's not his forte. You know what I'm saying? But he does have some wicked grappling. And not being able to take down Evloev on a night where I don't think he looked his best. But, you know, I'm not going to take away from, not Evloev, Ilia Topuria. Not going to take away from Ilia Topuria. But I do think Mitchell can do better than that. You know what I'm saying? He seemed a bit desperate for the takedown. He seemed like he wanted out a bit. You know what I'm saying? But maybe that's just because Ilia is so good that, like, he realized in the middle of the fight, like, I'm out of my depth here. Probably. But at the same time, I think Mitchell's going to have a better version of himself in this fight than he showed in his last one. And I can't help but understand that Dan Ige against Damon Jackson, before he got the KO in round 2, weren't exactly looking amazing against him. And it's because of that threat of the takedown. Now, has he improved his grappling? Probably. But Evloev exposed it. The Korean Zombie went to it as a plan B. You know what I'm saying? The Korean Zombie literally went, you know what? I could outstrike this dude. I'm probably going to take some risks to do it. I'll just out-grapple him instead. You know what I mean? Mitchell has that as a plan A going into this fight. And I think he does pretty well against the shorter opponents as well. Taller guys he can do well against as well, don't get me wrong. But I think Bryce Mitchell's going to do pretty well to get to the hips here and get that takedown on Dan Ige. And I think once he gets one of the takedowns, the finishing potential of Dan Ige is going to come down massively. And once that happens, I think Bryce Mitchell's going to be able to find his other takedowns a bit better whilst landing some shots on the feet to set it up. So I'm going to go with Bryce Mitchell. Andre Fili's no slouch on the ground. He's been wrestling for a long time at Team Alpha Male. He has wrestling. He's good. And Bryce Mitchell was able to out-grapple him. I think Bryce Mitchell's going to be able to do it. And not to mention what he did to Edson Barboza. He dominated Edson Barboza in that fight. Positionally, at least. He didn't beat him up that badly to 10-8 rounds, but he dominated him positionally, at least. And he did get a takedown on Ilia Topuria, so I think he will be able to get the takedowns on Dan Ige. It's a tough matchup for him, but maybe with all this stuff going on in his life, there might be some value on a Dan Ige KO in case, you know, with the stuff with Mitchell's ex-girlfriend is getting into his head a bit on fight week and he wants to go out there and scrap. But I reckon a composed, calm Mitchell puts everything else aside, forgets about his last fight, is going to go out there and out-wrestle Ige pretty well. It was just the way Evloev out-wrestled him. And we haven't seen Evloev do that to everyone. As much as Evloev is seen as this dominant, unstoppable force in the featherweight division, the Lopez fight was real close on short notice. The Dawodu fight wasn't that dominant, and he had a tough third round. He went to a split decision with Nick Lentz, clearly won it 2-1, but still went to a very competitive fight. Decision with Grundy, where Grundy might have got a round, or had a close round in that fight as well. And these other fights that he had, where he took to a competitive decision in Sungwoo Choi and Enrique Barzola. So I think maybe Ige was the weak link out of all of them, where that was such a hole in his game that Evloev was able to expose it. So I'm going to go with Bryce Mitchell, implementing his grappling and outdoing Ige in the grappling. We move on. Up the card, Rafael Fiziev versus Mateusz Gamrot. Now, does Gamrot have better wrestling than Rafael Fiziev? He does. He obviously does. You know what I'm saying? But is Fiziev freakishly strong and muscular for the division? Low center of gravity as well. I've got an itch on my head. Low center of gravity as well. Dangerous power in his hands. In hindsight, looked amazing against Gaethje because it turns out Gaethje's reborn himself or rebirthed himself in that division after beating Dustin Poirier. That's the new version of Gaethje. And Fiziev took the first round on my cards pretty clear. You know what I'm saying? Took the first round off Gaethje pretty clear. Had a really close second round that I think he only lost because his eye was swelling up. I think on shots landed and effectiveness of those shots, you can arguably give it to him, but because of visible damage, you're like, okay, Gaethje landed that. It swole his eye near shut. It made massive red marks on his eye. I guess we got to give that round to Gaethje. It was one of those types of rounds where you got to fine tune and go through the criteria to score it. So I think Fiziev looked really good. Gamrot don't push a worrying striking pace for Fiziev to deal with. His grappling might be able to push a pace on Fiziev, so if this does go past the third round and Fiziev's been winning, maybe there'd be some value on taking Gamrot if he's a live underdog in any way. But I have a vision in my brain And I've known this about Gamrot for a long time, and I've always said this about Gamrot. I don't like the way he strikes. And eventually, he's going to pay. I thought he might have paid against Jalen Turner. I don't remember who I picked in that fight. I might have picked him because Frevola out-grappled Jalen Turner. So I might have picked him to win that one. But Jalen Turner was cracking him in that fight on the feet. And he was like really reaching for those takedowns. And it was on short notice, so it wasn't ideal for him. I understand that. But I think he's just a little too easy to hit. And I don't like his stand-up. I do not like his stand-up at all. I think he reaches with his shots. He don't have anything but a 1-2. 1-2. And it's not a Strickland level of boxing 1-2 either. He throws a 1-2. And that's it. And shoots his doubles. He doesn't really do much else. And that's worrying to me. And it's a decent 1-2. Like, he's a lightweight top contender. Don't get me wrong. He's not terrible. But I think Fiziev's body kick is going to be there, as it was for Arman Tsarukyan. I think Fiziev's a bit quicker with his body kicks than Arman Tsarukyan as well, and a little bit more dangerous. And I think he's going to be able to catch Gamrot in the pocket. If Gamrot throws his 1-2 and Fiziev manages to get out of the way of it, massive counter shots are coming back Gamrot's way. I think Fiziev's actually going to get a first or second round TKO and make a statement against Gamrot. So I'm going for Rafael Fiziev. I just can't unsee it. You know them fights where you think, okay, well, Gamrot's got better wrestling and, you know, Fiziev didn't look great against RDA, but still won. But Gamrot, what was he doing to Jalen Turner in the wrestling, really? He got positional control and had big moments now and again where he got side control in round 2, landed some punches, and round 3 ended in mount, which I think won him that fight, just barely. But in another world, Jalen Turner gets that fight. You know what I mean? Because one of the knockdowns was an off-balance one, but one judge might not see it that way and just go, oh, that was a clear knockdown, let's give it to him. So, I don't know, man. I'm going to have to go with Fiziev. I think there's a secret better half of lightweight. I always find this about divisions. At middleweight, I see this quite a bit as well, where there's like this secret better half of the division, where you look at them and you think they're not the best. And the other side of the division's showing more skill. But then eventually when they match up against each other, these two isolated halves, as they both rise up the rankings, one side always wins, and it's never the one that you, like, are wowed by amazing grappling or technique. It's always the ones where their style is just a bit more dangerous, and that seems to carry them quite a bit. And Jalen Turner looked terrible against Dan Hooker, so I'm going to go with Rafael Fiziev. I thought Gaethje was on the bad half of lightweight. You know what I'm saying? But it turns out he was the better half all along. Remember that narrative of Poirier's the better half, Gaethje's the sort of weaker half, and they're both taking on their own Oliveira fights. You know, Poirier did a bit better than Gaethje, and I picked Gaethje to beat Poirier because I've realized it was that secret second half this whole time. Dariush weren't on it. Dariush was thought to be on that side, but he wasn't. And who's Dariush fought? Gamrot, to the Jalen Turners, to all of the exposure. You can go down the lineage of exposure here. And it's like fraud check, fraud check, fraud check, fraud check, all the way down, while this secret side of the RDAs and the Rafael Fizievs and the Gaethjes are actually the ones that are the real forces to be reckoned with in the lightweight division. So I'm going to go Fiziev, is what I'm saying. In short, I'm going to go with him finishing Gamrot in the first because I can see it in my brain. Every time Gamrot throws a punch, I wince and cringe. And it's a different reason for why I wince and cringe at Fiziev's. When Fiziev throws, I wince and cringe because I can hear them shots landing. And it's, oh, damn, that was crazy speed. When Gamrot throws, I'm like, ugh, don't do that again. Never strike again. That's my mindset. So I'm going to go Fiziev. I like Gamrot, though. But I'm going to go Fiziev TKO. Like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Toodle pip. I'll see you later. Goodbye.